Right. Here's a headline from the right-leaning Wall Street Journal. Welcome to Canada. The doctor will kill you now.
Hey, that's something everyone can enjoy.
Who wants to go to a Canadian doctor after seeing that, if that's what they're saying in the Wall Street Journal? We'll get back to Tristan Hopper. He's a columnist, journalist for the National Post. But in this one, we're going to have Marc Carney. We're going to have Nick Nanos with Vassy Kapelos explaining their recent poll numbers. They're liberal sycophants. We're going to get back to Tristan Hopper, and we're also going to take a peek at former disgraced minister Marc Miller. He shoots off at Pierre, Poilievre, taking pot shots. Let's get into this. My name's Aaron. This is Canadian Looney. We've got a great video here to show. Let's get going.
Oh, yeah.
But Marc Carney is taking the plunge and going on a podcast in Edmonton. Let's take a look at how this works out for everybody.
Prime Minister Pierre Poilievre says you've flip-flopped on Canada's EV mandate. Hot right out of the gates here, that you finally admitted that the Conservatives were right, just like they were right on the carbon tax. Is that the case?
Oh, Ryan, well, first off, it's great to see you. Great to be here. I guess for others to hear you. And great to be back home. Look, there's a lot in that question. Let's be clear about several things. The first is there is a lot of pressure on the auto sector right now. Pressure because of U.S. tariffs, which are fundamentally changing the economics for Canadian automakers. Pressures because of technological change in other aspects. So what we're doing is we're putting a pause on this EV mandate for next year. That's part of a much bigger set of things we're doing for the automakers, providing them with liquidity, providing them with capital so they can retool and become more competitive, building out new markets, working with the steel sector, working with labor, working with a variety of other things. So it needs to be seen in the overall aspect. The second thing, there's lots of things that Pierre Poilievre has been consistent about and been consistently wrong about. One of the things he's been consistently wrong about is the fact that lower carbon, lower emission, EVs, hybrids, using biofuels and other things, a big announcement we made last week that's going to make biofuels, Canadian biofuels, much more effective, including using Canadian canola. He's been wrong about the fact that that's part of what's driving competitiveness in the auto sector. Absolutely blind to where the sector is going. We know where the sector is, where it's going, and we're helping to support the changes that are necessary.
U.S. tariffs have forced your government into regulatory adjustments. How do you defend those changes to Canadians who see them as a step backward on climate policy?
Well, look, we're very focused on what we're calling climate competitiveness. In other words, making sure that whether it's Canadian oil and gas, whether it's Canadian automakers, whether it's Canadian electricity, Canadian artificial intelligence, that it's being produced in a way that's competitive as possible. And part of that is moving to lower carbon. So one of the attractions, we're here in Edmonton. Let's talk about a few things in Alberta, if you don't mind. The Pathways Project, which is carbon capture. It's potentially transformative for helping reinforce what the oil sand producers have been doing, which is to get their emissions down. Now it can take a step change for that. We're seeing it in lower carbon LNG projects that are building out on that. We're seeing it in nuclear. We're seeing it in a variety of areas that we're supporting. So look, there's a broad range of programs that are needed to make us carbon competitive. I'll give you one last one, which is a big one. We're going to be making some announcements next week around how we're going to accelerate home building in this country, how we're going to leverage. And we're in Alberta. I'm going to leverage Alberta technology. ATCO, one of the pioneers in prefabricated modular housing, much lower carbon in the construction, much lower carbon and much cheaper to live in. We want to scale that. We want to scale that technology by the tens of thousands, and we're going to move that forward.
How do you find that balance? What sort of safeguards do you look at to ensure that industry competitiveness doesn't override emissions reductions?
Well, it's a part of its timing, Ryan, and that is a tough balance sometimes to get right. The exact timing in which you're moving from an existing industry to one that does need to be lower carbon, lower cost. I mean, in the end, what's going to drive this is that it's going to be lower cost to consumers. And so I gave the example on housing. That's going to be 20%, 25% cheaper to live in. It's actually 20, 25% cheaper to build, 20, 25% cheaper carbon footprint.
He's just making up numbers. We're done with Marc Carney for this one. This guy can take a walk. Goodness gracious. Just making up numbers. Oh, yeah. So we're going to take a peek now at sycophant liberal pollster Nick Nanos with Vassy Kapelos, talking about how Carney is up in the numbers. How can that possibly be? Only Nick Nanos could make this make sense. Not even make sense, but try to explain it. Let's take a peek. Nick Nanos is a bum. Vassy Kapelos is a sellout.
I want to bring in Nick Nanos, who is the, of course, founder and chief data scientist at Nanos Research and also our pollster of record here at CTV. Hi, Nick. It's good to see you. Thanks for making the time. So let's start off with the top line numbers, because we've got not total congruence between all the polls right now. Some show a closer race. You're still showing the Liberals. What is your take on sort of the mood of the country when it comes to these two parties?
You know, what's interesting is that for the Liberals, you know, they in the last federal election, they had around 43% support, and our tracking, they still have about 43%, so that hasn't really changed. But, you know, the thing is that what we've seen is the NDP are doing a little better, and the Conservatives are not doing as well in the tracking. If you remember, Vassy, during the last election, Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives were really good at targeting working Canadians with their kind of cost of living stuff. And, you know, what we've seen perhaps is maybe some of those individuals that were opting for Pierre Poilievre in the past, those working Canadians, are perhaps drifting back to the New Democrats. But, you know, the fact of the matter is 43% for the Liberals, still pretty good. And the kicker is on the preferred prime minister number, right? Like, Marc Carney being ahead by like 20 points. And I think that's the real story. For Pierre Poilievre, he has to start to build his personal brand to be more competitive with Marc Carney, because Pierre Poilievre is trailing his own party.
How do issues factor into it? Because there's a lot of conversation right now happening. I know at caucus that they're gathered in Edmonton, at cabinet last week in North York, about like, what do Canadians care about? Have they become somewhat insulated from the ups and downs of Trump and able to focus on other big issues? For example, the prospect of losing their job, or inflation, or crime, or immigration, or are they still fixated on the Trump issue? What does your data show you about that?
In our weekly tracking on the top national issue of concern, focus on Trump and U.S. relations is still the top issue. But the interesting thing, Vassy, is when you look at the top four, they're all directly or indirectly pocketbook issues. So top Trump and trade, jobs and the economy. Then you have kind of inflation, the cost of housing. So think of Canadians worried about paying for the bills. Think of Canadians worried about their jobs, wondering what will happen in the next 6 months, wondering what will happen with the trade relationship. So there's a certain level, or a high level of anxiety that's underpinning a lot of those views right now. And, you know, for the Liberals, they've really got to start to deliver, because how long will Canadians wait to transition from the Liberals talking about things to delivering on some of the promises that they have?
What's your gut tell you about that?
Well, we did ask a survey, I think it was with you, Vassy, at CTV News, and a majority of Canadians wanted to see something happen by the end of the year. So this, by Christmas time, or by the end of the year, in the ideal world, Canadians would like to see something that the Liberals have accomplished when it comes to infrastructure projects, or when it comes to the economy, or perhaps advancing discussions on the trade dialogues.
Well, we're supposed to get an announcement tomorrow on major projects, so we shall see. We'll talk about that with our front bench in a moment. I also wanted to ask you about immigration, because it's become a real flashpoint, and I think all signs point to it being a big issue in the House of Commons and outside, even in the fall. You've done some polling for the Globe, which I found very interesting. It's not necessarily the top concern for all Canadians, but we've seen an evolution of views on the issue writ large.
Absolutely. Actually, what we're seeing is that Canadians are increasingly wanting to see the number of either new individuals brought into the country or temporary foreign workers to be actually diminished. And you know, you can see that 7 out of every 10 Canadians would like to see the numbers reduced. This doesn't mean that they're against immigration. I think this is more about right sizing or calibrating kind of the number of new Canadians that we need. But, you know, I think in an environment where people are worried about their job, you know, they're worried about the economy, they're wondering what the future has in store, that the appetite for more immigration is much more tempered than it has been in the past, and people would like to see things kind of adjusted.
It's interesting that
So how do you feel about immigration? Leave it in the comments. We're done with Nick Nanos for now. He has nothing more to contribute.
Hey, that's something everyone can enjoy.
We're going to take a look now at Tristan Hopper. He's a writer for the columnist for the National Post. He has a lot of interesting things to say right here. real interest.
We have an assisted suicide regime that is now the world's model of what not to do, and that sentiment is shared on both the left and the right. Here's a headline from the right-leaning Wall Street Journal. Welcome to Canada, the doctor will kill you now. And here's a headline from the very left-wing Jacobin. The Canadian state is euthanizing its poor and disabled. The principle of harm reduction as a response to drug addiction was invented in Europe, specifically in Liverpool. But we took it to such extremes that we're now doing things that would draw stares even in the most liberal hippie corners of Denmark or the Netherlands. Nobody else handed free daily rations of recreational opioids to drug addicts and then acted surprised when it resulted in a tidal wave of those same opioids hitting the black market. Nobody else had public health officials calling for free government distribution of smokable fentanyl. Nobody else had a court decision finding a constitutional right to shoot heroin on a playground, since asking a drug user to move to a different section of the park could cause them irreparable harm, thus violating their Section 7 rights under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The idea for Don't Be Canada came about because in my role at the National Post, I make a point of reading what the world's media is writing about Canada. When I started at the Post in 2011, international outlets either wrote nothing about us, or it would be some niche story about how if you wanted to run an effective points-based immigration system, or climb out of a sovereign debt crisis, or organize efficient general elections, or if you wanted to shoot terrorists from really far away with a sniper rifle, then Canada was your model of how to do it. The international headlines we're making these days are not nearly as quaint. We're now the world's nightmare scenario for real estate unaffordability. We're the world leader in overdose deaths, with Vancouver emerging as the world's center for illicit fentanyl consumption. The BBC called Canada the world capital for auto theft. We're history's only country that declared itself guilty of an ongoing genocide. And we're definitely the only country whose prime minister did so at a women's conference and was met with applause and cheers. We have the only military on earth that mandates tampons in every men's washroom and disciplines any service member who jokes about it. A year ago, U.S. talk show host Bill Maher, a lifelong progressive, recorded an entire segment about how the United States should actively do the opposite of whatever Canada was up to. There's only one problem with thinking everything's better in Canada. It's not. Not anymore, anyway, he said. Now, why did this happen to us? How did we go from one of the most boring, uneventful, peaceful, well-managed, and socially cohesive countries on earth into a petri dish of dumb ideas? My grand unified theory is that an entire country decided to run absolutely everything on the honor system, and was surprised when this immediately sent everything to hell all at once. We'll run a criminal justice system that gives bail to everyone, and if you violate your bail conditions, we'll just give you bail again. We'll run an immigration system with little to no screening and with massive loopholes we refuse to acknowledge or address. We'll establish an entire legal framework based around the notion that your gender is whatever you say it is, and not give any thought whatsoever to how such a system could possibly be abused.
We're going to wrap it up here with Marc Miller. He's a former cabinet minister. He held a variety of portfolios, screwed them all up, and now he's here taking pot shots at Pierre Poilievre. He's a jerk with a big nose. We're going to take a quick peek at Marc Miller now. Like, this guy is bitter about the way he looks and acts, and he's going to go on the attack on Pierre. He used to be a cabinet minister. Now he's chair of the Justice Committee and has done a hack job of that so far. We've done a video on that. Anyways, Marc Miller is going to shoot off. He's gross.
Is it being badly run?
I think probably is in part being badly run. I've heard the statements by Pierre Poilievre. If he wants to continue to say the same dumb things he's been saying for 20 years, he can be my guest. That the program shouldn't be scrapped. It definitely needs to be fixed. It has problems. There's wide LMIA fraud in the program that continues to need to be fixed. We've started to reduce the overall numbers. We also have to have a conversation, I think, with industry that has gotten addicted to temporary work in Canada, and have a conversation as to whether that is actually depressing wages, which is important, and preventing innovation. The fact that this country's gotten addicted to temporary foreign workers is a challenge. Bringing the number of temporary residents down from 7 to 5% is going to be a challenge in the next 2 years, but I think we can meet it. But I think we have to talk clearly, or at least understand clearly what we're actually talking about. The program is comprised of, or at least temporary residents are comprised 40% of international students, 40% of international mobility program, really important for the economy, and 10% of sort of a low-wage stream agricultural program, all with different purposes and objectives, and you can't just scrap them and come out and fire off media sound bites that will rally up anti-immigrant sentiments. We need immigration, whether we like it or not in this country, but I think we can have a reasonable conversation about it. And frankly, when you have premiers coming out and saying substantially the same thing, it's unproductive. Premiers.
Nobody shoots their mouth off more and then virtue signals right away more than Marc Miller. This liberal lot, what a proof.
Well, particularly in Ontario and BC, have shot up the number of international students that are working in programs or in industries that aren't commensurate with the degrees that those kids have gotten, and that's a problem. And for example, in British Columbia, the designated learning institutions, which are entirely under the jurisdiction of the province of British Columbia, a number of them could be shut down entirely by that same premier. So, the fact that 50% of those programs and institutions are in Surrey is an issue, and I think people are reacting rightly to the fact that in some cases we haven't been as judicious as we should be about who comes to this country and who is not allowed to come to this country. It's not a right to come into Canada.
We're going to wrap it up right there. Aaron, Canadian Looney, like, share, subscribe, get notified. We're coming back with live shows on Monday. We cover the question periods. It's a fun, entertaining hour. Come and be engaged during that period of time. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Aaron, Canadian Looney, smash that subscribe and like. Share this with somebody. We'll catch you in the next video. These liberals are hard to watch. We've got to keep our eye out on them despite all that. We'll catch you in the next video.
And as the most European of the non-European countries, Canada looks first to the European Union to build a better world.
As a European, I am a European,
actually.
Oh, you are?
Yeah,
Oh.
Irish citizen. Yeah, so there you
welcome.
go.
Welcome.
Speaking as a European, I'd like to say the following.
These are Muslim values. These are Canadian values.